Listen, I'm going to try to do this without crying, but I'm probably going to fail. But just turn away or something, because it's embarrassing. It really is. As you may have heard, my Uncle Frank, who already has been a fixture on our show since our first night on the air in January of 2003, passed away over our vacation. He hated vacation, so he decided to ruin ours. He hated vacation because he loved to come to work. He would get here 10, 11, 12 hours before the show started. The show started at the beginning at 9 p.m. He'd be here by 8 a.m. That's how he was. He was always early for everything. If he had a flight at 2, he'd get to the airport by 6. If the flight was in the morning, he'd go the night before and sleep over. He'd sleep over at the airport so he didn't miss a flight. And he wanted us to always get to the airport early, too. If I had a 5 o'clock flight, I'd have to lie to him and tell him the flight was at 8, because then he'd say, okay, so you leave at 1? I'd say, no, I'll leave at 3. Okay. So it's hard to believe that he is now the late Uncle Frank, because he was never, ever late for anything. He was 77 when he died 2 weeks ago today. He had a few different kinds of cancer, and we don't know which one got him, but one of them did. And his plan was to live to 103. He wanted to be the oldest living retired police officer in New York City, not because he wanted to set a record or be in the paper. He just wanted to stick them for another 25 years of pension checks. It didn't work, though. My Uncle Frank, for those of you who don't know, was a cop in New York for 20 years. During that time, he, oh, there he is, arresting a woman. No, actually, during that time, 20 years walking the beat in Brooklyn and the Bronx, he made a grand total of 6 arrests. And one was by accident. He averaged 1 arrest every 3.5 years. On one of our first shows, I explained this to Snoop Dogg, who was on the show, and he said, that's my kind of cop. But he wasn't lazy. He would always say, I prevented crime. That's where there's no crime. And he didn't like to give tickets either. He had a list of rules for giving tickets. He wouldn't give tickets to women, wouldn't give tickets to young people, wouldn't give tickets to old people, and he wouldn't give tickets to anyone with kids, which pretty much covered everyone. So he gave out no tickets. And that's just how he was. His sergeants would bring him into the office and yell at him, and, so you have to give out more summons, you have to be out there, you have to do things. 10 minutes later, he'd be on the street in his uniform playing stickball with the kids in the neighborhood. And eventually, they just gave up and said, Frank's crazy, we'll let him do what he wants to do. He was a lucky guy. In 1953, my Uncle Frank enlisted in the Army to fight in the war. He went through basic training. He, I don't know who that is, that's on him. No. He said goodbye to his family. They shipped him off to Korea. And 3 weeks after he got there, the war ended, and he came right back home. He prevented war, too. Kind of influencing him. And, I think it was like 3 years ago, he decided to take a trip to Seattle. He always wanted to see Seattle, and he loved riding the train. So he bought a ticket to Seattle, and he got on the train. The plan was to travel, I think, like 2 days up to Seattle, and he was going to stay in the city for the weekend. He booked a hotel, and then he would get back on the train, and he would come back to L.A. Well, unfortunately, the train was delayed for about 4 hours in Portland on the way up. So when he got to Seattle, it was later. It was like 4 hours later than he thought it would be. So rather than risk the possibility of missing his train back, he decided to skip the hotel, spend the night in the train station, and take the first train back to Los Angeles. He went to Seattle, he saw none of it. Not a Starbucks, not a Space Needle, nothing. But he said he had a great trip and he loved it. He was a crazy person. He was very weird. After he retired from the police force in New York, for some reason, after living his whole life in Brooklyn, he decided to move the family to Las Vegas. He'd never been to Las Vegas. He didn't know anyone in Las Vegas, but he decided to move there. And for some reason, my parents decided to follow him. He'd heard that retired cops could get jobs in security at the hotel, so they got a moving truck, they packed up the station wagon, and they drove to Las Vegas. Uncle Frank got a job at Caesar's Palace, which was a big deal, and somehow he became a security guard for Frank Sinatra, which was a very big deal in an Italian household. And he would tell us stories about how Sinatra would roll up $100 bills and hand them to people. Once a week, he'd get a little stack of $100 bills, and he'd roll them up and he'd slip them behind his back to my Uncle Frank, who he said, Sinatra was a good sport. He'd spread the money around. Spreading the money around was very important to Uncle Frank. He tipped his dentist. He went to the dentist, and after she was done, he gave her money. And I think she was too stunned to say no because she took the money, but he would tip everyone. He loved handing money out. At the beginning of the week, he'd withdraw like $200 cash from the ATM, and at the end of the week, whatever he had left, he'd hand out. And then he'd start fresh with a new $200. Once he was on the subway, this old man in a wheelchair rolls onto the car, and the guy had a cup in his hand. So my Uncle Frank pulled like a $5 bill out, and he stuffed it in the cup. But unfortunately, the man had coffee in the cup. He wasn't a beggar, he just... So my uncle told him, "Oh, keep that, buy yourself another coffee." He was oblivious. He once said, Jimmy, I'm an inconceivable person. And I have no idea what he meant by that, but yet I understand it completely. I love to ask him weird questions because he always had an answer, and it was usually a great answer. Once I asked him, if you could ask God one question, what would you ask? One question. And he thought about it for maybe half a second. He said, I would ask him, why so many species of animals? That's the one, you have one question for God. He said, yeah, why so many species? Why do we need them all? And I would love to have seen the look on God's face when he asked him that question. After Uncle Frank retired from Caesar's Palace, my aunt and uncle got divorced, and my cousins, he has 3 daughters. After college, 2 of them moved back to New York. So after sitting around doing nothing for a year, he decided, I'm going to move back to New York. His plan was to walk up and down every street in New York. Every day he'd walk a different section of Brooklyn or the Bronx, sometimes places he used to walk as a cop, and he'd just walk around talking to people. But that got old after like a year. So he took a part-time job working security at St. Patrick's Cathedral, and in his full-time job was terrorizing my cousins. When they left for work in the morning, he'd be standing outside their apartment, making sure they left for work in the morning. And when they asked him to stop doing that, he'd just go to their work and wait for them there. Keep in mind, these are women in their 20s who had to explain to their boss why their dad was at work every day waiting for them to get there. He was very, very focused on making sure bills were paid on time. So he would go through their mailboxes to make sure they had the right amount of postage on their letters. He loved paper products. Once a week, he would go shopping for toilet paper. And in the middle of the night, he would leave like 3 rolls of toilet paper outside their apartment door just to make sure they had it. He was like the toilet paper fairy. He didn't have enough to do, and I always thought that he was hilarious. He'd drive my cousins nuts, and I would laugh hysterically. So when I got this job and I had no idea what I was going to do with it, I called him. I said, I'd like you to come to Hollywood and be my security guard and talk to me on the air. And even though he had no idea what I was talking about, I mean, he didn't know if I was doing a TV show or a radio show or a puppet show or what was going on. He had no clue. But there was a Citibank near the theater, which meant he didn't have to transfer his checking account. So that cinched the deal, and he agreed to come. From the moment we put him on, he was great. He went to movie premieres. He went to award shows. He went to Mike Tyson's pigeon coop back when Mike Tyson was still scary. We'd send him on. We sent him on these adventures with his ex-wife, my Aunt Chippy, with my cousin Sal. We'd send him to red carpet events where he'd call Chris Tucker Chris Rock and call Chris Rock Kid Rock, and he really saved me when I had no idea how to do this. He made a very close friend in Guillermo, who's this guy there, and
Jimmy, he was my best friend.
What's that, Guillermo?
He was my best friend, Jimmy.
He was your best friend. Guillermo called him every day, even before he was sick. It got annoying, to be honest with you. Uncle Frank left me a voicemail. He would leave hilarious messages on our answering machines, but this one, I saved for tonight. He was very excited about his funeral. He would love this so much. I almost think he died intentionally just to get this tribute show while we're still on the air. Listen to this message that he left me.
Jimmy, hey Jimmy, this is your Uncle Frank, Jimmy. Jimmy, I'm with you all the way. In fact, Jim, I'm a lot older than you, and I will die a lot before. I want you to do the holy. You know what that is. You get up and you talk, okay? Don't memorize the holy G. Let it come out natural. Okay, Jim, I see. I love you so much. And eat. Make sure you eat.
I made sure that advice I'm definitely following. People always ask me, is he really your uncle? And he really is my uncle. But he made everyone he met feel like he was their uncle. I see people nodding because he took interest in every person who worked at this show. Not only did he know them, he knew their husbands, he knew their wives, their kids, he knew their parents. He didn't know their names. He called Trevor, Travis, and Brandon Brad, but he knew them and he cared about them. He cared more about other people than, you ask people how they're doing, you really don't care what the answer is. He wanted to know how you were doing, and I think that's rare. And he loved the people who watched the show too and came to the show. He would get such a thrill out of being recognized. He would wear his security uniform on the subway to work and on the subway home. Okay? And if you recognize him, he'd take you and your whole family to breakfast the next morning. He would bring random families to the show. I assume they were somehow related to us or he knew them from the past. Like, Jimmy, I want you to meet Brad and Tammy and the kids. And I say, oh, how do you know Uncle Frank? And they say, well, we met him in the parking lot last night. He would get, he'd get letters from prisoners asking for money, and he would send money to them. He was a police officer for 20 years, but he would send money to criminals without thinking like, oh, maybe this is not the right thing, because he saw good in people, even if there was no good in people. We had a memorial service for him, for our staff here last night, and a guy who used to work here, I'll call him David, since that's his name. He got up to speak. He was a writer on our show, and we had to fire him, and we were upset because we really liked him. So on the day we let him go, he packed up his things, and he's very sad. He's carrying a box. And, of course, Uncle Frank has no idea what's going on. He's like, David, how's your mother? And goes through the whole thing. And he noticed David was sad, and so he asked him what was wrong, and David, he told him I'd been fired, and Uncle Frank listened, and he told him he was talented, and he was going to do, it was going to be okay, he was going to do great. And David said they talked for like half an hour, and then Uncle Frank walked him out to the parking lot, and as David's loading his things into the car, Uncle Frank says, I'll see you tomorrow. So he didn't listen closely, but he was listening. He had so many friends here, people I didn't even know he knew. And it's crazy because who makes 400 new friends after they turn 70? It just doesn't happen very much. I can't believe how many people who work here said that last night they tell their kids they're proud of him because Uncle Frank told them to do that. He'd say, your kids already know you love them. Tell them you're proud of them. They'll never want to let you down. And I think that's good advice. And I think the best evidence of that is seeing him in the hospital with his three daughters, my cousins, Aunt Sally and Mickey. And they slept in his hospital room for 2 weeks. It was becoming a health hazard. We were almost thrown out of the hospital. But they're draped over him like puppies, and that's the result of it. And I know he's very proud of you. So, Uncle Frank loved being a part of this show. And I want to say thanks to my co-workers who talked to him and visited him and Picked him up 12 hours early for work. He loved you. And thanks to all of you who came to the show and who watched for indulging me and letting me put my crazy uncle on a television. Our next guest spent 20 years on the NYPD, 20 years as security at Caesar's Palace, and most impressively, 27 years married to my Aunt Chippy. Please welcome my Uncle Frank.
My name is Uncle Frank.
And now the end is near, and so I face the final curtain.
He was a cop in New York for 20 years, and how many arrests did you make in 20 years?
6.
Hey, that's my kind of cop right there. Hey.
I'm here to interview lots and lots of stars. Some of them are,
I'm Uncle Frank for the Jimmy Kimmel Show.
Nice to meet you.
Besides being gorgeous, you have a great future.
I love being with children because my IQ is below normal. So I love just being with children and enter whatever it is with children.
Regrets, I've had a few, but then again,
I don't know why human women become groupies for the Muppets.
No kidding. Yeah, I can see it.
Can you?
Yeah, you're very attractive.
But you don't mean that in a gay way.
No.
No. I'm just playing.
I know. No, you're just pleasant to be around. I know exactly where the continent of Africa is.
Show it to us.
Well, I'm in the way. Right above my head.
You better not get fresh with me. I'm telling you that right now. I didn't.
Pony on, Ron. What are you doing to me, Jimmy? What are you doing to me?
yes, there were times I'm sure you knew when I bit on more than I could
Chippy, I'm gonna grab you now.
Chippy, this is almost I ate it up and spit it out. I faced it all.
Snap, crackle, and pop.
I stood tall and did it my way. I've loved, I've laughed and cried. I've had my fill, my share of losing.
I've done more in these years, fun-wise, than I've ever done in my life.
Forward ball. 1, 2, 3. Forward ball. 1, 2, 3.
So amusing to think.
But if you come across a monkey, gently, pet it very gently, and don't eat a monkey. Don't eat any part of a monkey.
Say, not in a shy way. Oh no.
He's a lucky guy.
Thank you, Uncle Frank.
I did it my way. For what is
We did it on purpose. We're sorry.
Uncle Frank,
Salad me.
April Fools.
he truly feels, and not the world.
Are you ready for maximum pumpitude? I don't believe this job I have.
Yeah,
I don't believe this job.
We can't believe it either.
I took the blows and did it my way. It was my